Hello there. Elements of the UK state are now targeting Jewish children. This vile practice must be eradicated and government departments purged. So parents living in Edgware, North London, sent their 6-month-old daughter's birth certificate off to the passport office earlier this month so she could be issued with a British passport. But when it was returned, the place of birth of the parents on her birth certificate, Israel, had been scribbled out, and the certificate was also torn. This from an official arm of the UK government. Who the hell are we employing in these offices? And could this become a Nigel Farage debanking moment when loads more Jews come forward and say, "Me too"? The father, also named Israel, said, "The baby isn't even 6 months and is already suffering discrimination. It's like going back to the Nazi 1930s when Jewish documents had notes on the side. This baby did nothing wrong and was just born to Jewish parents, that's all. We sent it to the Home Office, which is in charge of our security and should be the most safe place for our private document." Well, that's obviously no longer the case. Not only have we imported conflict into the country, we have now imported conflict into our government departments. And one wonders how deeply into our intelligence and security services, as well as our armed forces, this now goes. Especially after recently hearing about plans to water down vetting procedures to get more foreign-born, non-white people into the Navy, Marines, Army and Air Force. What are we going to end up with? Segregation at every departmental level in our UK public services? Documents like driver's licences coming back, altered by woke activists to create the society they want to see. You could end up having the gender non-binary stamped on your driving licence or something. Not that they have that data on them, at the moment. Seriously though, this might sound like a one-off and insignificant affair that has upset a child's parents. But the fact it has happened shows how serious this situation is becoming. That a person felt emboldened to do such a thing shouts out from the rooftops that it is now getting out of hand. And if you still think it's not a problem, just consider what might be happening to the names, addresses and dates of birth of certain people, falling into the hands of the likes of Hamas operatives maybe. We rely on places like the Home Office to look after our data. But what is actually going on? How do we know, given recent revelations, that there are no moles these days beavering about and feeding names and details out to our enemies? It only takes one person in such a position to cause a lot of damage. If we can't trust them not to openly abuse our documents, how much would you trust them with your name, address, date of birth, telephone numbers and email details, and even your bank details? And further remember that no manager these days in public service must ever question an employee about anything, especially if they're from a minority. This is not a minor thing. Government departments hold most of our details about most of our lives, including health data. And if the perpetrator of this incident is ever located, and that's a big if, I doubt we'll ever find out. And they'll get a minor reprimand, and after an apology and a bit of compulsory re-education, no more will be said. Oh, and this is also very important. I've seen in social media comment sections the assumptions about this perpetrator's ethnicity or religion. Don't assume anything. Just look at the marches now taking place every weekend in London. How many of those are nice, middle-aged, woke white people who look like butter wouldn't melt in their mouths and would never say boo to a goose? We have so many of those types working in the public sector that anything is possible. And the current situation in Gaza does seem to be exposing a nasty underbelly of anti-Semitism amongst many of them. But what we're being fed is that the Home Office is looking into whether this might have been some sort of error. Anyway, the Campaign for Anti-Semitism called it completely unacceptable, adding that, when sending off a passport application to the Home Office, the last thing one should ever expect is to have their child's birth certificate returned, torn, with the parent's place of birth scribbled out, just because it is a Jewish state. Yes, but here we are in UK 2024. And looking at the way inward migration and birth rates are developing, I don't see this improving anytime soon, especially if our political masters keep doubling down on the woke stuff. And that will keep getting worse because of our education system indoctrinating our youth. This is definitely the time to get unwoke and purge a lot of these people out of the system. And then we have those that have swum the murky waters of the Westminster bubble and have been taken in by all the woke around them, and they just go along with it because they think everyone else in the country feels the same way as the Westminster blob, so they'd better toe the line as well. As in the case with the armed forces, where there are two schools of thought. One being that as a priority, the armed forces must reflect the society they are drawn from, and that's the main object. And two, that as a priority, they are a bunch of people who are totally loyal to the UK and who are prepared to get real tough and do what's necessary to protect us when needed. Option 1 gets a proportion of the lazy, the anti-UK, the unfit, the criminal-minded, that the other personnel have to carry when they should be relying on them. And option number 2 gets you a cohesive fighting force. So no, the armed forces should not reflect society. It should reflect the very best of society in the physical, the mental and the moral. Anyway, back to this growing divide in the UK over the Gaza situation. An area of politics that I wish the royal family, in the form of Prince William calling for a ceasefire, would keep out of. Because everyone will now be wondering if King Charles or Queen Camilla put him up to it, to put out the royal thinking on the situation, to try and influence the nation. Now, many on the pro-Palestine side are claiming that the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is emulating the acts of a certain genocidal leader of Germany in the 1930s and 40s. And by doing so, they display a distinct lack of historical awareness. In both that case and the situation in Gaza today, the Jews were attacked by a genocidal maniac and their dedicated loyal team of genociders, and supported by much of their citizenry too. Don't forget the cheering in Gaza on October the 7th. However, in Germany, when those attackers were the ones that started taking the battering, their top brass took to their bunkers and ate the best food and drank the best wines, while they sent their children and old men into the battlefield, enjoining them to sacrifice themselves for the cause, which many did. To the point the Allies had to suffer huge losses and inflict even larger losses on the enemy as they fought inch by inch and foot by foot through the country, and then they had to flatten Berlin to get into that final bunker to ensure that evil was eradicated from the earth. Whether it did or he successfully made it to South America is another question. And for decades after that, Germany remained occupied to ensure the peace. Hamas is also a first aggressor in this conflict and is now sheltering in tunnels, taking control of aid food while their own people starve, and then try to blame that on Israel. And the Hamas hierarchy are the ones hiding in the tunnels with that food, or in the comfort of a foreign capital in plush surroundings, and watching and waiting as their own children are fed, by them, into the meat grinder. The sooner Israel can finish the job, the better. And I hope they then go after the rest of the Hamas leadership, wherever they go and however long it takes.